Welcome back to the Organized Academic. My guest today is Rob Haskins, double Dr. Rob Haskins. He's got a doctorate in harpsichord performance and a doctorate in musicology from the Eastman School of Music. And Rob has also written how many reviews, CD reviews over the years?
I think it's about 1,300.
1,300 reviews for general audiences about music. Rob is a conductor, not a conductor, a composer, a musicologist, a performer, and he's now head of music at his institution. And I wanted to talk to Rob today because he's gotten so much done, and yet he still finds time to sit with his cat Freya and have a drink in the evening with me and talk. And I know as a fairly newly minted administrator, he would have a lot to say about that transition from being a scholar and a performer into administration. So welcome, Rob.
Thank you, Elizabeth. It's nice to be here.
And I love your little, loft there. That is your background on Zoom. That's very attractive.
Well, the loft, the image of the loft is very similar to the image that I like to have whenever I'm doing any kind of serious work. And that's not to say I want to be in a space like that, but that the things in the image are inspiring to me because they are spare, they are minimal, but they're also quite elegant and organized. And I know some people work best at a big desk that's littered with papers and books. I have never been able to function very well that way. I like to have a very clean working space and be near my books, pull one out as I need it, and shelve it. So that's basically the same thing as in my office. When I leave my office at the University of New Hampshire after a day of being the chair, I make sure that the larger part of the desk is completely clear, and that
Absolutely.
I have a clear
Funny,
sense of what's
I
going on.
just
Yeah.
interviewed somebody the other day about the fact that they can work anywhere. They can have every mess around them. They can be in the middle of a coffee shop and it doesn't matter. And here's you sort of the opposite, which just shows you the variety of disciplinary habits that we have in our various academic careers. So
Yeah.
tell me, Rob, how have you gotten it all done? How did you do two doctorates at once and do all these CD reviews and still have time to have a drink with your cat in the evening? Like what are your secrets? What are your tips?
Well, in the old days, when I was working on my degrees at Eastman, as well as working 35 hours a week in the Sibley Music Library, we had what your viewers probably won't remember, which are PDAs. Do you remember PDAs?
Yeah.
Well, I don't even remember what it stood for. Palm Desk Assistant, Personal Desk Assistant,
Yeah.
something like that. And I worked, I would take my assignments for that week and I would schedule out the week to the minute. And my supervisor at Eastman would sometimes chuckle when the alarm would go off. I would just go to the next thing I had to do. I would mark out how many pages I've got to read for this seminar or that seminar so that it would all be done by the next week or whenever the course met again. And I'm not quite so
Rigid?
rigid, compulsive about that as I used to be, but in those days it was absolutely essential because any one of these tasks you could get absorbed in and completely lose track of time. And particularly since I was working 35 hours a week, that was, it certainly wasn't a hard job, but it was a time-consuming one. So I had to make sure, because I needed to work, I had to make sure that there was a space for everything else.
Right. And now, do you carry any of that forward into your modern life many years later as an administrator? Do you have that kind of focus?
Well, in the sense that I like to do things at regular times of the day, that is true. For example, when I was at Eastman, I would get up very early and practice until about noon. So that would be about 7 hours of practice. And then that was done. And then I could do the rest of my day combining work and classwork. Now, at the University of New Hampshire, what I tend to do early in the morning when I first get there is answer email. And lately, what I've tried to do is carve out a definite amount of time for email, and then after that, move to something else, be it a scholarship project or a creative work project, because I am more active, I'd say, now as a performer than I am as a musicologist, because the University of New Hampshire is a very unusual place in that there's a long tradition of musicologist performers there. Keith Polk, for example, a very well recognized and respected scholar of instrumental Renaissance music, was also a fine horn player.
Great. So you've lucked into a job that does suit your particular proclivities quite well.
Yes, and I would say it's a somewhat miraculous because, of course, we know the field and we know that even when we were on the job market, we needed to have a very established profile of what we were doing. You know, publication record would be helpful, but also a very clear sense of who we are. And when I was applying to jobs, people were confused. Well, is he a harpsichordist or is he a musicologist? And then the option that I could be both was not one that could be considered for whatever reasons.
Purist. Yes. You have to do one or the other and you have to do it all the time.
Right.
Now, how have you found then this transition into how long have you been head now? For a year or two?
I was suddenly elevated in October of 2019 when our then chair became promoted to the position of Associate Dean of the College of Liberal Arts. I was very lucky coming at that time because we had a very superior academic department coordinator, someone who had herself been a student at the school and who had worked there for many, many years, knew all the history, had exceptional institutional memory of policies and procedures. And I went to her when I was first being asked. I initially didn't want to do it because I'd settled on a new research project that was really interesting to me. And that was really all I wanted to concentrate on, that and really improving my effectiveness as a teacher. And she said, don't worry. I do a lot of the stuff. You don't have to think about it. I will walk you through this.
How lucky.
Very, very lucky. And that she did. She was so good that she often did things. She would always double check with me, but she wouldn't necessarily tell me exactly what was involved in what she was doing after I said, yes, this sounds fine. So she was really a godsend. And unfortunately, or fortunately for her, unfortunately for us, she took her retirement as of June 28th. So we have a wonderful new person, young, in the position. Sorry about that. Fry is knocking the computer around.
Okay.
Who has a lot of energy, a lot of drive, is himself a performing musician. He's a trumpet player. But the most important thing about him, when I hired him, I asked him, why do you want this job? And he said, I would like to return this department to the glory days, because right now we're down considerably in terms of full-time faculty. We're relying on a lot of adjunct help. And I said, great, this guy has a vision as well as a supreme work ethic. So
And that's unusual in an assistant position. You're expecting the head to be that person. You don't expect to be surrounded by people who have the same mindset.
Right, but I'm fortunate enough in that there are several positions, several faculty here who are equally vision oriented. They are all different in ways, but it's nice to know that the kind of thinking that I value is also being practiced by some of my colleagues.
Now, I'm kind of curious. I think people will be interested in this 1,300 CD reviews, which is not something that for your normal academic you're doing in terms of service to the community, to the musical community. How did you find time to do that? Did you have to work out that you did less research or did you just not sleep, or how did you do that?
Well, again, it goes back to the miraculous schedule that I kept for myself when I was a graduate student. I started doing this particular job in 1993, just before I entered Eastman, and it came as on the recommendation of our mutual friend and colleague and mentor, Ralph Locke. There were times when I had to balance and I wasn't able to do it. But most of the time, I kept all of my deadlines very well, again, by ruthlessly scheduling out things so that I had time to do it. And then, of course, as time went on, I was able to do them more quickly.
Yeah, with the experience.
Mhm.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Now, how do you find you talked a little bit about having an excellent assistant to help you through the administration, but how do you find administrative work is the same as different than complements your scholarly work and your performing? Is it a completely different brain that you use, or are there a lot of similarities?
I would guess there are as many different types of administrative minds and personalities as there are administrators. For me, the transition was very simple because I've always been an extremely organized, detail-oriented person. I think as far as possible, and I'm improving on this, I was always a very good listener and I had good diplomatic skills. And these things are as important in doing scholarship, working with collaborators and co-editors and so on, as they would be working with the faculty and staff. So I basically took over the same mindset when I started being chair. And I've gotten good reports that I can't remember what the dean said exactly, but something along the lines of, I led with great poise.
Oh, that's wonderful to hear.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
think
that's a
that's a
great actually.
superlative for me. I mean, look at this
Yeah,
background. That's sort of me at my
yeah,
best.
yeah, yeah. So, what advice would you give to young academics coming through, either people who are just finishing or on the job market or starting out their first jobs? What lessons have you learned over the years that you think would be helpful to those people?
Well, I think first and foremost is have your research in mind. Be aware of all the current trends in research, not just your particular area. And remember that as it was with your dissertation, a dissertation is written one page at a time. I think there are people who write and they agonize over every sentence and every comma and every paragraph and every page. And I've always stressed, just write and don't worry about revision. If you're the type of person that starts at the beginning and has to go through the end, I would suggest having either a storyboard or some other kind of diagram um, that clearly lays out the parts of your article. And you attack each of these parts like you would chapters in your dissertation in chunks. The first subsection of the part that you really want to do. That's another helpful thing for me is when I was beginning a research project, I would write what was on my mind without necessarily putting it into the context of a study that had a clear thesis and so on. Sometimes a little bit more clarity is useful, sometimes not, because when you're unfettered by a thesis statement or the critical literature that might be used to provide evidence for arguments, you actually have more creativity. And
Interesting. Yeah.
I think creative scholarship is a lost art, largely speaking.
Now, you're not only a scholar, you're also a teacher. And what have you learned as a teacher that you would want to pass down?
Every new year is a new opportunity to learn from your students. And when you learn from your students, you not only see the way they think, as opposed to the way the students you first started teaching thought, but you get a sense of what they particularly need as individuals. There's one size does not fit all in teaching. You have to be aware of the people around you. Teaching is best done as a community. So first thing, try to get the students engaged in conversation. I often do this by asking sort of silly questions, but it opens them up to the possibility that this is a safe space in which they can all communicate. Jokes always help. That said, you have to be more prepared, particularly as you go along. So again, this is a different story for different kinds of teachers, but I write out all my notes. I don't write them out so I will read them. I write them out so that I can think about what it is that I want to do for them. And in recent years, I've used PowerPoint. For several years, I avoided it because I didn't like the rigid quality of it, but I have learned, especially with students of more recent vintage, that they need help understanding what's important.
Yeah.
One course I was teaching, writing things on the whiteboard, and I was looking at the students, and they were just staring at me. They weren't writing. They seemed barely awake. It was an 8 o'clock class. Uh,
Hmm.
and I said, oh, this is not good. I've got to figure out things to do. Now, I have a colleague who is very, very diligent about learning new teaching strategies and technologies, and she's constantly refining her work. I haven't quite gotten to that point, but I always remain receptive to the students that I'm in front of and try to cater to them. Another piece of advice I would quote from John DeVario, who died tragically, the Schumann scholar. And he said once, I love all my students. I love the bad ones and I love the good ones. That is hard to apply.
Yeah.
Especially for a freshly minted PhD who knows more than he's ever going to know, or they're never going to know for the rest of their lives.
Yeah. Well, that's a wonderful place for us to come to an end with loving your students. So thank you, Rob Haskins, Double Dr. Rob Haskins, for being my guest today on The Organized Academic. And best wishes to Freya, your cat.